After Dark, My Sweet, Chapter 11. He dusted at his trousers, like a man will when he first gets out of a car. He took his sunglasses off and wiped them, gave me a glance and a nod, and put them back on again. I nodded back at him. I went through the gate and down the steps to the walk. He started toward me, still dusting at himself. We passed each other. He went up the steps and through the gate. I started down the walk. I reached the corner of the clubhouse. I stepped behind it, glancing over my shoulder. The real chauffeur had stopped and was staring at me. I don't know how it came about, whether he got a glimpse of the boy's face or whether it had just taken that long for the situation to sink in on him. Probably it was the last. A thing can be so completely startling that it doesn't startle. Anyway, the man swung into action fast. He didn't even yell, which of course he should have. He came charging through the gate in a leap and down the steps in another. And he came pounding up the walk after me, fists churning, his head ducked. All action and nothing else. I backed away from him, getting further behind the clubhouse, still holding on to the boy. When he was right on top of me, I stuck my fist out. I gave him a straight arm with a fist at the end of it, and he piled right into it with his face. His glasses exploded. I felt his nose flatten and crunch. He reeled, wobbled on his heels, and toppled forward. He was out like a light, hit harder than I could have hit him. And no one had seen it. That fancy clubhouse was in the way, and the estate walls were in the way. They were walled off from the world, and the world was walled off from them. I ducked around the corner. I put the boy flat on the floor of the car, climbing in over him, keeping a foot on him while I shucked out of the uniform stuff and put on the hat. Then I wheeled the car around in a U-turn, crossed through the intersection, and headed for the highway. The Van de Venter chauffeur was still lying where I had left him. As I turned the corner and the playground vanished from view, he was still sprawled behind the clubhouse. There had been no cars passing by at the moment I gave it to him, but several had passed since then, and others were passing now. Yet no one stopped. They had other things to do, and it was none of their business if a man had fallen down. I'd gone a couple of miles before I realized I had my foot on the boy. I lifted it off at last and gave him a little pat. There was nothing to be afraid of, I told him. He'd just stay there and take it easy and no one would hurt him. He looked up at me, his big blue eyes filled with tears, his lips trembling and as pale as his face. "All right, he gulped. I'll... He tried to tell me that he'd do what I'd said, but it got all tangled up in a sob. I told him not to try. "Just rest, Charlie boy. Just be real nice and quiet and everything will be fine. I won't hurt you. I won't let anyone else hurt you." I went on talking to him, soothing him. I guess he must have believed what I said, because the sobbing stopped and a little color came back into his face. I turned on the car radio, keeping the volume low. There was nothing on the air yet about the kidnapping. I didn't think there would be, but I was curious to know when the news would break. How long it would take. Apparently the chauffeur was still knocked out, lying where I had left him, and no one had stopped to see why he was there. The matron? Well, I was kind of puzzled about her too, because she must have seen the two of us together, and she must have known that things weren't as they should be. But, well, there you were. That's the way it usually goes. People who might do something that needs doing are too busy to do it. The others don't give a damn. Yes, the police department was on the job. Relatively speaking, that was just about the best patrolled area in the city. In this section, there were regularly assigned squad cars covering a 5-mile area. The way it worked out on paper, the cars were supposed to cover as much territory as a dozen men on foot. And they could, too. They could cover it, all right. But the police in it couldn't do a hell of a lot more than that. They couldn't drive lickety-split all day and see everything they should see. The officers couldn't be looking into trouble while they were driving around. If there was trouble, they had to leave the car and the radio while they investigated. And if something popped, meanwhile, it had to wait until they got back. That was the setup, the same kind of efficiency arrangement you find in lots of cities. It saved money for the taxpayers and it was good business, running the department on a business-like basis. At least, it must have seemed that way then. Ordinarily, it should have taken about half to 3/4 of an hour for the trip from the playground to the house, but I took the trouble to drive slowly so as not to attract attention from the police or anybody. It was a strain doing that, talking to the boy now and then and listening to the radio, so I turned it off. I wanted more and more to open up the station wagon and get there as fast as I could, but I kept well within the speed limits. Then, somehow, maybe because I was trying so hard, I managed to get lost. It was well over an hour and a half before I pulled up in the yard of the house. Uncle Bud and Fay were at the kitchen door, just standing there, white-faced and kind of dazed-looking, almost motionless. Inside the house I could hear the radio blaring the news of the kidnapping, so it was out now. I took my time walking up to them, then I stopped just off the steps and listened. Like all first-hand reports, it was confused. The facts of the kidnapping were more or less there, but the story was all garbled. They had no description of me, nothing beside the fact that I was fairly tall and of medium build. They didn't know what kind of car I'd used. Both the matron and the chauffeur were being questioned. All available police, including those off duty, had been ordered to the area. The entire neighborhood had been blocked off. A search of every estate in the vicinity was underway. All servants, particularly uniformed chauffeurs, were being intensively grilled. The boy's parents were prostrated. The mayor had demanded all-out action. The police commissioner was pressing for an immediate solution of the case, and the chief of police had promised that no stone would be left unturned. The news had just broken, but everyone that was anyone was all ready with a statement. They were so ready with their predictions and promises and demands, you might have thought they'd been expecting something like this. But I don't guess they had, or if they had, it hadn't bothered them much. I went back to the car and around to the other door. I spoke to the boy, then I lifted him out gently and started up the walk. He was sound asleep, exhausted with the excitement and strain. I was practically knocked out myself, but naturally everything had hit him a bit harder. Fay and Uncle Bud moved out of the doorway. I'd have knocked them out of it if they hadn't moved. I brushed past them, carried the boy into the spare bedroom and laid him down on the bed. I slipped off his shoes, partly unbuttoned his shirt. Then I went back into the living room, pulling the door shut behind me. Fay and Uncle Bud had snapped out of it a little, enough at least to wobble back into the living room and fix themselves a drink. I fixed myself one and sat down. Fay looked at me out of the corner of her eyes. She gave me a straighter look, her lips trembling as she tried to smile. I stared back at her, and she dropped her eyes and the smile went away. Then it was Uncle Bud's turn. I went through the same thing with him, staring through him, forcing the smile back into his face, making him look away. They both sat looking at the floor, almost holding their breaths, sort of poised on the edge of their chairs. They looked like they'd jump if I said boo, and I left them that way. It was the way I wanted them to feel. I leaned back and sipped at my drink, listening to the radio. There was nothing new, just the same hot air without anything behind it. I got up and fixed another drink. I switched the radio off and sat back down. Well, what's the matter? I didn't surprise you, did I? Faye's head came up. Her breath went out in a deep, quavery sigh. Surprise us, she said. Surprise us. Oh, Collie, how... Why in the world did you do it? Why not? It was what we planned on. It was what I was supposed to do. But not that way. Not after you'd made a mistake, and it was so late you were almost sure to... Her voice broke, and she covered her face with her hands. She rocked back and forth, kind of sobbing and laughing, smiling and frowning, all at the same time. That seemed to bring Uncle Bud back to life. He let out a laugh, slapping his hand on his knee. Surprise? He beamed at me. And what a surprise, kid. I got to hand it to you, boy. I bet there ain't another man in the country that could have pulled a stunt like that and got away with it. There's plenty that could do it. All you'd have to do is get them sore. Pick yourself a guy that's a little bit off and then try to throw a curve under him and he'd do it. Yeah? He weaved around that one. Well, I know what you mean, kid. You hold the short end of the stick just so long and then you start swinging it. You've had enough, see? People just don't want to get along with you, no matter how willing you are, so finally... Shut up! Huh? Now look, kid. I said to shut up. But... He brushed the back of his hand against his mouth. Well, sure. Anything you say, kid. You gave me a card when I first came here, I said. You wrote your name and address and telephone number on it, in case I had to get in touch with you. It's in your own handwriting, remember? Not just a printed business card that I might have come by accidentally. I paused, letting it sink in on him. He wet his lips uneasily. You wouldn't have found that card on me today, I went on. You couldn't have got it back. I won't tell you where it is, but I'll tell you this. I've got a good friend or two around the country. Even a guy like me will pick up a few friends. And if anything should happen to me, the cops will get that card mighty fast, and they'll be told where it came from. I was lying, of course. Probably Uncle Bud had a good hunch that I was, but he wasn't very bright, and he didn't have much in the way of guts. And if his hunch was wrong, if I wasn't lying... His eyes flickered as he tried to make up his mind. He brushed at his coat nervously, his fingers lingering at the ominous bulge under his handkerchief pocket. He wanted to do it. He wanted to so bad that he could taste it, but he couldn't quite talk himself into the job. It was a pretty screwy thing, I told him, like something out of a cheap movie. But, well, I was a pretty screwy guy, wasn't I? I'd already outsmarted him once today, and with a stunt that made less than no sense at all. So if I'd done it once, why wouldn't I do it again? How the hell did he know what I might do? Collie, said Faye, breaking the silence. What is this? What are you getting at? I didn't answer her or even look at her. I sat watching Uncle Bud a moment longer, grinning at him. Then I got up and walked over in front of him. Well, how about it? You've got a gun. You were all set to use it an hour or so ago. Why don't you do it now? His mouth opened. His lips moved silently, helplessly. I caught him by the shirt front and yanked him to his feet. Can't make up your mind, huh? You're scared, stupid and scared. Well, I'll give you a little help. Maybe if you get good and sore. I gave him a little jolt under the heart. Just a little tap with my fist. Uncle Bud grunted, his face went white, and I tapped him again. around the heart, down in the kidneys, and up on the wishbone. I held him with one hand and fed him those little jolts with the other, and his face seemed to turn from white to green, and his tongue slid out from his teeth. I reached under his coat, grabbed his gun, and shoved it into my belt. Then I dropped him down into his chair and went back to the sofa. Uncle Bud sat bent over, hugging himself. He wasn't really hurt bad, just temporarily paralyzed with the pain. But I guess he thought he'd been about half killed. Faye frowned at me, scared but more puzzled, it seemed, than anything else. "Collie," she said sharply, "I want to know what this is all about." "You know, Faye. I told you right from the beginning. I told you I wasn't stupid, and I didn't like for people to treat me like I was." But what's that got to do with it?" She paused and went on in a lower voice. Does it have something to do with yesterday? I'm terribly sorry about that, darling. It just came as such a shock to me that I couldn't think. I didn't know what I was doing for a while. Then I ran off and started drinking and made such a mess of myself that I was ashamed to face you." "Forget it. I know how you felt and what you felt, so don't bother to tell me." "But," she hesitated again, I'm sorry I let you down today, Collie, but I just didn't see how I could go through with it. I wouldn't have been any good to you. The way I felt, I'd have been almost sure to spoil things." "But you pulled yourself together. You felt well enough to leave right behind me, to be Johnny on the spot after I'd pulled the job." "Well," she nodded slowly, "yes. Uncle Bud thought we ought to do that much to help, at least. If something went wrong, if there was trouble, we might be able to pull you out of it. I was still sick, but I was worried about leaving you to do everything. And Uncle Bud thought we... That's right, kid. It was Uncle Bud getting back to normal. That's just the way it was. We were concerned for you, having to do everything yourself, and we figured we'd better kind of keep an eye on things." I laughed. I didn't say anything, just laughed the one time and chopped it off short. Faye's eyes flashed. "And it's a good thing we were there. If we hadn't been, you'd have taken the wrong boy." "Yeah? It hasn't maybe occurred to you that I picked that boy up deliberately?" "Deliberately? But why would you do that? What?" "Now look," she said. "I'm getting fed up. What's he talking about, Uncle Bud?" He looked at me uneasily. He cleared his throat, tried to work up a smile, and it looked like something on a corpse. Faye frowned. She asked him again what I was talking about. It was a pretty good act. You'd have almost thought that she didn't know. "Answer me," she said. "I swear if this keeps up much longer, I'll... Now, he squirmed. "There ain't nothing to get excited about. The kid's just kinda got the wrong slant on things, and I don't blame him, you understand? I don't hold the slightest grudge whatsoever. He's been under a big strain today." "Will you stop stalling and tell me?" said Faye loudly. "Well, you remember what we were talking about the other night? About maybe not actually going through with the snatch, just faking it kind of, and then having me step in and collect a fat reward?" Faye nodded. "But we couldn't do it. There was just no way we could. So what about that?" "Well, yeah, there was a way, all right. Just one way to make it look good. And I guess that's kind of what the kid's thinking about. Then maybe he thought I was jealous of you two or something. Of course, he's all wrong, but you see how it might look to him. You act like you're completely washed up with him. The kid figures we're both plenty leery of having him around. So when he had to go by himself today, and then we show up, why..." Faye's glass slid out of her hands. It bounced against the carpet and then toppled onto its side. It rocked back and forth, the ice tinkling. She stooped and picked it up. She reached out and set the glass on the table. She wasn't looking at what she was doing. She was staring at me, and it fell to the floor again. Faye didn't seem to notice. There was an expression on her face I'd never seen before, a kind of waking up expression. It was the way a blind person might look if he was suddenly able to see, if he really saw himself for the first time in his life. "So that's what you think," she said. "That's what you think of me." "Why not?" I said. "Yes, why not? If a person won't stop at kidnapping, why would he stop at murder? I don't think it makes much of a difference. About yesterday, Collie. About what happened or didn't happen. It may have brought about this situation a little sooner, but with people like us, people who've become what we have, we were bound to arrive at it." She rubbed her eyes tiredly and shook her head. "You were wrong about not being stupid, Collie. You are. I am. Uncle Bud also, to cite a self-evident fact." Now, said Uncle Bud. "What's the sense in all this glooming around? We had a little misunderstanding, but it's all over now. We're all square with the world again. We got what we wanted, and now we're all set to collect." Faye laughed. "Collect? Yes, gentleman and lady, now we can collect." "I said so, didn't I?" Uncle Bud turned to me. "Now I've been thinking, kid. There's nothing in the news about the station wagon, but isn't there a chance that that first boy might peep? I know it don't look like he would. He wouldn't want to admit he'd sneaked off and gone for a ride with a stranger, and probably if he did admit it, that matron would swear he was lying. But the cops won't be passing up any bets on this one, so..." Faye got up suddenly and went into her bedroom. I started to get up too, just instinctively, without thinking, wanting to go after her, to ask her if something was wrong. And then I caught myself, and I settled back down again. "I can ditch it over at my place, kid. What do you think?" "What? Oh, well, yeah, maybe you'd better do that. I'm pretty sure the boy won't say anything, but someone else might have spotted it." "Right. I'll take it with me then when I go and leave you my car. I can pick up another heap to get around in until we pull down our jackpot. Now..." He'd reached for the bottle and poured his glass half full. He was trying to be friendly and casual, but his hand shook. Underneath his big, easy smile, he was scared stiff. "Now, I figured I'd mail the ransom note tonight, if that's okay with you. They'll get it for the first thing in the morning." "Look," I said, we've been all through this. You know what you have to do, and there's no point in asking me about it." "Yeah, but..." He hesitated. "Well, I don't want you to get any more wrong ideas, kid. I don't want to do anything that maybe you, I won't get any ideas without a damned good reason. Just don't give me any reason, and I won't get ideas." His smile warmed up, began to look a little more natural. "Now you're talking, kid. Hell, there's no use getting all up in the air and acting unfriendly, is there? We had a little misunderstanding, and I don't blame you a bit, see? But now that we got it cleared up... All right, let's just cut it off there. I'm tired of kicking it around, and I'm tired, period." Sure, kid," he said hastily. "Now, what do you think about..." He broke off, started another sentence. "I think I'd better have something of the boy's, kid. A label out of his clothes, or maybe his handkerchief. Something to send with the ransom note, so they'll know it's just not some crank writing. A case like this, you know, there'll..." I got up, cutting him off, and went into the bedroom. I eased the boy's handkerchief out of his pocket, saw that it was initialed, and took it back to the living room. Uncle Bud said it would do fine. It was just what he needed, and maybe he'd better be running along now. I walked out to his car with him. He gave me the keys to it and got into the station wagon, But he still didn't leave. He kept rambling on, thinking of things to say. "That uniform and stuff, kid. Better get rid of it right away. Take it out and bury it. I know. I'm going to. Better get to work on that hair right away, too. Scrub it out until there ain't a trace of the dye left in it." I said I would. I knew everything I had to do, and I'd do it. But he still didn't leave. He still sat there fidgeting with the car keys, making conversation. So finally I did the only thing I could do. He'd made a half a dozen starts at doing it, but he was afraid to carry through. So I took the lead. I shook hands with him. And a minute or so later, he drove off.